I've been seeing in my comment sections and in the continuous video game discourse various games that continue to be compared to the launch of No Man's Sky. I've been meaning to talk about this for a while, but I've been putting it off because those arguments kind of carry a tad bit of legitimacy. A tad bit. Some. A little bit. A fraction of. But after the launch of Cyberpunk 2077, my need to talk about this comparison has reached critical mass. So welcome to the LZ, ladies and gentlemen, on this sort of No Man's Sky, not No Man's Sky topic today. A few things before we talk about this topic. I do not own Anthem. I do not own Cyberpunk 2077. I do not own Fallout 76. Because if anything, the launch of No Man's Sky has taught me that really I should be wary of launches. But even before No Man's Sky, this was a behavior that maybe I could have, paid a little more attention to. Really, this should have been a lesson that we should all have picked up on. But your constant fear of missing out really perpetuates your need to plop that $5 down for that pre-order, right? So I've become more and more annoyed with the regular comparisons of large AAA games and their terrible launches to the botched launch of No Man's Sky. And let's be clear, something else I'll be really transparent about too. I also, on this very channel, if you have been a long-time subscriber of the LZ, you know that I was particularly honest about how much I hated the launch of No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky was always just good enough for me to enjoy and keep playing and stick around over the years and even create content for. And I even have a community here that largely appreciates my regular uploads. Regular. At the beginning, my biggest criticism of Hello Games was their silence at the launch. Many of us who bought the game at launch were pretty much left high and dry for about 3 months once the game came out to just, here it is, 1.30 or 1.03 or whatever version that was. This is it. This is, this is what it is now. But looking back on that, even just a few years ago, I changed my stance on that. But more on the silence later. So when we look at some of the most recent of years, AAA launches, while No Man's Sky was on its giant ascent into sort of the stardom that it is now, well, I compared to games like Among Us that have gone massively viral or whatever, it's not that huge. But the game is still, 4 years later, collecting Best Ongoing Game awards. Like the launch never happened, right? The discourse about No Man's Sky has largely and overwhelmingly shifted to the positive. And, in its first year, more often than not, it was met with a cynical snipe of, haha, Sean Murray is a liar or something. But comparing that to these larger game launches, games like Anthem and Fallout 76 and Battlefront 2 and now the largely panned Cyberpunk 2077, unless you have a monster gaming rig that can really chew this game up and spit it out, then the rest of us are really just not having a great time with this game. I don't own it. I haven't bought it. I was going to, but I was saving until, maybe one of these days somebody somewhere can bless me with a PS5. But I keep seeing games like No Man's Sky used as the metric to compare these failed AAA launches to, and this is nothing but just completely false. The difference between No Man's Sky and Hello Games and the launch of these major AAA publishers and gaming platforms is wildly different. Now, I know the cynical part of you is waving red flags right now going, it doesn't matter, but it does matter. So let's put a few of these things into context, right? Ubisoft, CD Projekt Red, EA Games. These are massive, corporately structured businesses, most of which are billions and billions of dollars worth of revenue and profit and cash on hand, with hundreds or even thousands of developers working on a project at any given moment. Now, of course, to compare the scope and ambition of No Man's Sky to a regular AAA game like Cyberpunk 2077 really is not that fair. I mean, they both have their merits when it comes to sort of technology and differences. But if you look at the core of the differences between these two businesses and how these developments worked and how the launches happened for these, they're wildly different. So let's put it in perspective. No Man's Sky launched in a terrible state. We can all admit that. That is the objective truth. So did all of the other aforementioned games that I've mentioned several times in this conversation already. Before the launch, the game was delayed by about a month and some change. Seems things were kind of in trouble, right? They were scrambling. They had to try to somehow reach a vision or a part of a vision that they had pitched prior to. But a lot of folks seem to forget that in 2014, Sean Murray himself said to Danny O'Dwyer's face on GameSpot before he moved away from GameSpot, in a video titled Unveiling the Gameplay of No Man's Sky, the Next Big Game, a video that has just over 400,000 views, Sean Murray himself says that No Man's Sky will not launch with everything being possible. The man said it himself. To me, that automatically clears him of any wrongdoing in the respect of being a liar. Does the man suck at communication? You damn right, and he's also owned up to that too. He was also regularly quoted as saying that he wanted the game to be a lot like Minecraft and that it wanted to live a long life of constant regular updates so that it could see a constant and perpetual revolution of new coat of paint, smell, whatever, which it has clearly done and demonstrated year over year. Well, with the exception of last year, because, 2019 was a bad year. Beyond was an awful, awful, awful update. But that's just me. Some other context. When Guildford flooded, that almost completely destroyed the Hello Games studio. Go ahead, Google it. I know you want to. At that point, when that flood happened, none of us knew what the state of No Man's Sky was. Since after the launch, Sean Murray said that he would be lying if he said that it wasn't a setback to the studio and the game. Having to spend weeks, rebuilding your studio and replacing all the equipment that the flood ruined, I would imagine that would be some level of setback. Seems logical to me. And then finally, Sean Murray revealed shortly after, about a year, maybe two after launch, that Hello Games was running out of money towards the end of No Man's Sky's development, inching closer towards launch. And with nobody there to support them further, maybe give them a cash injection, perhaps maybe Hello Games didn't even want it, the only choice at that point was to launch the game in the state that it was. This is where the biggest criticism comes. And to be fair, it's a fair criticism. But looking back, thinking about all of the silence and all of the things that the studio didn't say really actually was a great idea. Felt cold at the time, of course, but just think back to that day, knowing that No Man's Sky is a good game that it is now. That's a subjective taste, of course. It's not for everyone. But just ask yourself, what could Sean Murray and that team actually have said post-launch that anybody would have been happy with? As a matter of fact, great video that went viral, 2-3 years after the game launched, The Ingoodening of No Man's Sky, really helped to tell the story probably better than even I could. So now that I gave some context about the No Man's Sky launch, let's talk about it being compared to all of these other AAA launches that were botched and why that's kind of an unfair thing. Particularly for the fact that No Man's Sky is a tiny studio, they maybe have bit off more than they could chew at this point for an overly ambitious product. Sure, it's rewarding now, but its growth was definitely stunted at launch. Let's just be honest here. When you look at a publisher like Ubisoft or EA with their botched launches of terrible games like Battlefront 2 or Anthem, or the massive joke, the meme that continues to be Fallout 76. These studios all have one major thing in common. They could have absolutely afforded to delay their games and keep their games in the oven a lot longer. But profits, selling those games, and particular holiday windows or whatever were more important than the integrity of the vision that they were trying to give. They were even ready to throw the Star Wars brand like J.J. Abrams did under the bus in order to achieve this. What's the difference? Sean Murray and studio didn't have a choice. It was launch the game or kill the studio. Think about yourself and put yourself in Sean Murray's shoes in just that moment and ask yourself what you would have done. If you sold your home, which Sean Murray did, to help fund this studio and the development of Joe Danger, after leaving one of these companies, he worked at EA for the longest time, to get away from this environment that I'm talking about in this video, where the integrity of a vision and the beauty of a game is lost in favor of profits and, launch windows and pre-order bonuses and things like that. What would you have done? If I ask myself the same question, I would have done exactly what he did. And yes, I would have ran from you like a coward while I put my head down and kept working on the thing that I was so passionate about. It's cold. Again, it's nobody feels good in this interaction, right? I imagine Sean Murray must have had, ulcers and stuff at that point. But when you look at the launch of something like Anthem, or you look at the launch of something like Cyberpunk 2077, these were deliberately put out with the intention of misleading people, right? Reviewers couldn't even present footage other than what CD Projekt Red presented, right? Juxtapose that to No Man's Sky not releasing I got my review copy for the game the day before launch, much like everyone else did. And then you think about the controversies surrounding crunch, right? CD Projekt Red devs crunched to hit a development window. And weirdly enough, they did all of this to launch a game that, after all of that, those blood, sweat, and tears of crunch and, endless hours of work on a game, it launched in a bad state anyway. Right? It's so much so that even the console holders want no part of this horrific thing. So much so that we're like, yeah, we'll refund it. Here, take it back. You can have your money back. Go for it. And even Hello Games crunched, but they crunched because they had no choice, right? They had to launch on the day that they launched. Everything in this business, this tiny little business that at that time was on the lower floor of a tiny office building where Ethernet cables were running between floors because they would experience internet outages. Like, I empathize more with somebody like Hello Games that at the launch of No Man's Sky was just shy of a dozen developers with almost no budget trying to launch something that would put them on the map. And of course it did at the time for all the wrong reasons. But the choice at that point was binary, right? It's not a fair comparison because at the end of the day, EA, Ubisoft, Bethesda, and CD Projekt Red will survive this. They will survive this even after, the negativity surrounding this launch for this product. I mean, Ubisoft was just the ire of a complete and horrible story where the executives were allowing harassment, sexual harassment, and things like that to perpetuate in their office, and it was even rewarded to a degree. And they just got the license to make a Star Wars game. Like, they will live. The difference between those games and a studio like No Man's Sky and Hello Games is that those other studios and those publishers will live on, right? Even after this poor choice that they made. Sean Murray and Hello Games would have likely had their doors closed. What's another difference? Anthem is dead and buried. This huge, gigantic game that demanded your money and hoped to squeeze more and more money out of you. The Avengers, that's another example. A game that is currently received in such a tepid manner that now it has season passes on a character level. Like, it's mind-boggling how we allow this to happen. No Man's Sky has been alive for 4 years and hasn't dared to ask a penny more from you other than the buy-in price, which is commonly on sale and reduced price regularly, like 8 times a year or more, particularly before they're about to launch a free update that is about to hit news waves again about restarting the discourse about the launch and is No Man's Sky good now? And here's the thing. Only about 15% of my subscribers even watch my videos, which, if you're here, please subscribe and hit the bell if you want to see more of this, because I would really like to raise that number. I digress. But the YouTube algorithm itself is still presenting No Man's Sky regularly. I just put up a video that's about to cross 3,000 views on just what I'd like to see from No Man's Sky in 2021. Not that many of my actual subscribers are watching this video. These are being presented through the SEO to YouTube viewers. So while EA put a game out like Anthem to really just let it die, at its horrible reception. I'm sure it has its cult following and fans. We all have our favorite 70 Metacritic game out there that we will defend to the hilt with whatever objectivity we see fit to use, and maybe I'm biased as well. I have a channel that's made, 1.2 million views almost exclusively on No Man's Sky, so it's there. I own that. But at the same time, I just want folks, even if they find both scenarios between Hello Games and AAA publishers like EA or Ubisoft or Bethesda, I just want them to have that perspective, right? That perspective is important when we are taking a game that could have clearly stayed in development for another year or two, funded by a major publisher. They could have absolutely did that, right? It would have pissed a whole lot of people off that have been excited for that. Hey, you know what? We're going to delay another game like Halo Infinite, right? Perfect example. Great for Microsoft to do that because they can afford to do it. The Halo Infinite reveal was garbage, and I'm a Halo fan. And it just, when you're trying to sell me a console that is $500 and the cream of the crop and the console to buy, evidently, the most graphically powerful thing in the universe, and you show me a game that looks like its graphics were programmed for the first Xbox One. And that's hyperbolic, I know, but, I'm expecting some bells and whistles, and I just wasn't that impressed, even though I'm still excited for the game. Halo 5 was glorious, and I'm probably in the minority for that too, but that's an example of how a game and publisher can afford to do that, even if it might make people mad, and even if it sold less Xbox One X's, which, from where I'm sitting, I don't have one yet, and I can't find one, so something's going right somewhere. It can absolutely be done. These publishers chose not to do that. Hello Games had no choice but to do that. Now, of course, there are things in closing that Hello Games could have done differently, right? Did they have to launch at $60? Probably, I think, because they published their own game, but of course, they were working with Sony at the time to launch it exclusively on the PlayStation, so maybe that was a dictation by Sony. I'm not an expert. I don't know. If I was Sean Murray, I would have probably sold it for like $40 instead. And then, of course, they could have just been like, hey, let's do this early access, or let's just say this is right now in a beta phase, mind our mess. But again, I go back to the idea that says, what could they have said that would not have, been received in a totally negative manner, even though they meant the best of intentions? You really got to think about this from the little guy's perspective, right? Maybe you don't see it as acceptable how it was handled at all. But when I think about it as if I were to own a small studio like this and I'm faced with a difficult choice after I personally bit off more than I could chew, to have just a handful of developers take care of this, I think I would have made the same choice. What do you think? Love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me, what do you think about the AAA games that have launched and really disappointed half of the world? And of course, keep it here in the LZ for more here in the future.